So welcome YouTube for Clear Vision Wednesday. I'm super excited to be here today with a special guest, and I'm Claudia Mühlenweg. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the creator of the Naturally Clear Vision Method. I help my clients to improve their eyesight naturally and see clearly without glasses or contacts or surgery. And today I have a super special guest, and it's a topic that you might not really connect with vision. It's about bone health, and we're going to talk about osteoporosis. And my guest is Kevin Ellis, also known as the Bone Coach. And I'm going to bring you on, Kevin. I'm going to show you. There you go. Hi.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. So tell us a little first about you. I don't want to read your whole bio. We have that underneath the show notes so people can read that on your bone specialist. But how did you're pretty young. I think you're in your 30s. So how did you get into the whole osteoporosis and bone health? Because that's pretty unusual, right? For somebody like your age.
Yeah, right. Usually when you hear about bone health and osteopenia and osteoporosis, you're not thinking about the 30-ish-year-old male or someone in their late 30s. You're thinking about the woman later in life. Maybe you're thinking about your grandmother, right? Or somebody that had a cane or was hunched over, had a dowager's hump or something like that. That's what you're thinking about. You're not thinking about the young male. So for me, my journey in the bone health area really started with my own osteoporosis diagnosis in my early 30s. And a lot of people, when they hear that, they're shocked. I was shocked at the time too, but my health journey really started a long time before that. So when my mother was 5 months pregnant with me, my father, he was told he had cancer. 2 months after I was born, he passed away. So I had this fear my entire life that I was going to follow in his footsteps to an early grave and not be there for my kids, right? Not be there for my family. And after I had gotten out of the United States Marine Corps, I started having all these different health issues in my late 20s. So I had poor sleep, high stress. My muscles were wasting away. Cellular level, I felt like I had nothing left in the tank. Some days I could barely even get out of bed some days. And I was finally told I had a celiac disease. So I was malabsorbing nutrients. Celiac disease is this autoimmune condition where when you ingest gluten, that gluten can damage the villi in your small intestine, these tiny little hair-like projections that are responsible for absorbing nutrients. And that's what was happening to me. And my body still needed these nutrients and these minerals to execute its daily functions, to go about living its life. And I was pulling from my bones to support those daily functions. And that's how I was eventually diagnosed with osteoporosis. And at that point in time, it was really shocking. And it wasn't even like a conversation. It was a letter in the mail that was sent to me. It was a letter in the mail. And they said, you have osteoporosis, go on a gluten-free diet. And that was the extent of the guidance I got when I was first told I had osteoporosis. And I was shocked. I remember when I was reading this letter, the blood just rushed from my face. And I was like, what does this even mean for my future? And when I started looking it up online, it just said, fractures and medication dependence. That would be the summary of what I felt like I got from that. And I was like, I have to get a second opinion. So I got that opinion. And then I realized I in fact had osteoporosis, and I had a young daughter, son on the way. And I had a reason at this point. I was like, I have to do something. I felt like I was going the path of my father. And so I started doing reading and research and consulting with a lot of different people and spending a lot of money trying to figure these things out. And I eventually started getting the right plan in place, and I was improving my health, my bones. And I realized along the way, it's not the 30-year-old male that's having this problem. It's the woman, 50, 60, 70 plus, that's told they have osteopenia and osteoporosis. And at the point of time they're told that, they're presented with 4 options: calcium, vitamin D, go for a walk, and take a bone medication. And we'll see you a year from now for your next bone density scan. And that's woefully inadequate, right? And that's really the reason why I became a certified integrative nutrition health coach. I built out a team of highly credentialed experts, and we now have helped people in over 1,500 cities around the world with our Stronger Bone Solution program. And I really that's how I came to create Bone Coach and bonecoach.com.
So this is such a crazy story, and your experience with what, you got that letter, that's very similar to what a lot of my clients tell me with the eye doctors, right? It's like you get those terms, but then good luck, come back in a year and, hope for the best. So, I mean, so you really think that you're the exception, that's very unusual, your case? I'm just curious about that, because we know, right, I'm in my 60s, and I'm like, you're a target audience, so to speak. I'm at this age where that happens a lot. But do you really feel that that was the exception, that for you, because of the celiac disease, that was really the trigger that caused all that?
Well, so with osteoporosis, for me, celiac disease, that was the primary factor. There were other reasons, probably from when I was younger. You put on about 90% of your bone mass by the time you turn age 18. And by the time you turn 30, that remaining 10% approximately fills in. So for me, being right around 30 years old, I was right around the time I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, was the time I should have been hitting peak bone mass.
Right.
And there were probably a lot of things from when I was younger. And for those listening and watching right now, there can be things from when you were younger that also contributed to you not reaching peak bone mass. And if you had poor diet and nutrition, if you had an eating disorder, if you led a sedentary lifestyle, if you smoked or drank excessively, if you took certain medications, all of those things can contribute to you not even starting with peak bone mass from a young age. And then if you add on top of that some of the other conditions and things like that we can talk about in a little bit, there can be other factors that then begin to contribute to bone loss and osteopenia and osteoporosis. And usually I think the best place for people to start is even just understanding what that is. Like, what is osteopenia and what is osteoporosis? And when you hear that,
before we get into those descriptions, so how common is, like, let's say, I'm in my 60s, how common, like, do you have percentages, how many people have that? And how do you know if you have that? I've never broken a bone in my life, fingers crossed. But how do you know that you have osteoporosis and osteopenia? And maybe we can actually, maybe while we're doing that, you can quickly explain what are the two things, what's the difference?
Sure. And this is an issue for a lot of people. It's not just something that, like, if we're even talking about, I don't know how many of your clients are in the US and around the world and things like that. I mean, we have a global client base too, but even if we're just talking about in America, in the US alone, we've got like 10 million Americans have osteoporosis. You have another 44 million that have low bone density. You've got 1 in 2 women and up to 1 in 4 men that break a bone in their lifetime due to osteoporosis. And for women, the incidence is greater than that of heart attack, stroke, and breast cancer combined. So wow. It's pretty significant. And this is not something that's on a downtrend, right? This is something that's increasing in nature. So if we're talking about what is osteoporosis, it literally means porous bone. And it's a condition that's characterized by either you've got not enough bone formation, you have excessive bone loss, or it's a combination of both of those things. And in osteoporosis, both your bone density and your bone quality are reduced, and that's what increases your risk of fracture. So the way you find out you have osteoporosis is through what's called a DEXA scan. That's dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. It's a painless test, kind of like an X-ray, but very low levels of radiation. And what you do is you lay down, the machine does a scan, and it tells you the actual mineral content of your bone, your bone density. And then it generates a score. And that score is called a T-score. And the T-score is telling you how much your bone mass differs from the bone mass of a healthy, approximately 30-year-old adult, right? If you've got a score of +1 or -1, that's considered normal and healthy. If you're -1 to -2.5, that's considered osteopenia, which is like a precursor to osteoporosis. Mm-hmm. And if you're -2.5 or lower, that's considered osteoporosis. And the greater that negative number becomes, so -2.6, -2.7, so on and so forth, that's more severe osteoporosis, right? And that's what's increasing our risk of fracture. So most people aren't finding this out. They're not finding it out at 30 years old, right? They're finding it out 50s, 60s, 70s as a check in the box. Maybe their doctor has ordered it for them, but maybe not. Okay. So I always encourage people, you got to ask for that if you don't already have one.
That's a great point, because I think I've got it measured once, but not with that DEXA scan. And I also have private insurance, so usually you get better treatment, but if you have here, I'm in Germany right now, if you have the general insurance, like it's not, I don't even know how to translate it, but it's the, what is known as the National Health Service, I think in Great Britain, you probably don't get that as part of your, care curriculum, so to speak. It's probably a test that you have to pay for yourself. So now let's switch gears a little bit. Before, we also would definitely want to talk about the connection to vision, but I'm like, you talked about the causes, you talked about how you can find out that you have it. Like, is it reversible, or is there something? That's obviously what we want to know. Like, what's the standard treatment protocol, and what are you doing different? You said standard, right? Vitamin D, calcium, go for a walk, and what was the other one?
Take a bone medication.
Take a bone medication. Okay, well, what is that bone medication, first of all, and what are you doing differently when you work with clients?
Yeah. So when we're told we have osteoporosis, we have to understand that first there's primary osteoporosis. That's typically related to the decrease in estrogen in postmenopausal women, right? Estrogen has a protective effect on bone. When estrogen levels decrease, as they do during menopause, that causes an increase in the activity level of cells that break down bone. But there's a whole nother cause of osteoporosis, which is secondary osteoporosis. And that's the category I fell into. And that's where it occurs as a result of behaviors, disorders, diseases, medications, and other things like that. What we don't want to do is make an assumption, just because we're a postmenopausal woman, don't make the assumption that it's just hormones, right? Even if your doctor says, oh, it's just hormones, natural part of aging. No, there may be something else contributing, and you have to investigate that further. So that's really where you have to start, is you have to start investigating those things further. In terms of actually being able to make sense of all of this, you're going to be told, if you're told you have osteopenia and osteoporosis, you're going to be presented with a medication in the office as the way forward. That's for the majority of people I speak with, that's the way forward for most of them, is what is proposed. And these medications, you have to just be aware, they have a dramatic effect on bone physiology. It's not like taking an aspirin. So the ones that most people are probably familiar with, there's two different categories. There are anti-resorptives, okay? And the role of these anti-resorptives is to slow down the activity level of cells that break down bone. So this would be your bisphosphonates, like Fosamax. A lot of people have heard of Fosamax. And your rank ligand inhibitors like Prolia. So there's risks and side effects that come with these medications. But one of the most important things to point out is that with bisphosphonates specifically, the safety and efficacy is not really known beyond 5 years. And then, as you and I, Claudia, and everybody else, we're going about our daily lives, doing these activities and exercising and moving around, we're starting to get these tiny little micro cracks and things like that in our bones. That's normal, right? That's a normal part of the process. And you have cells within the bone that sense that damage, and they send out a signal and say, hey, we need to clean out this damaged bone and bring in stronger, healthier bone. And what happened, that's normal, right? For every single person, happens every day. But when you slow down the activity level of those cells that scoop out the bad stuff too much, you can start to accumulate that old, worn, damaged, weakened bone over time. And that can be one of the issues with taking some of these medications long-term. And then there's some other medications that you just have to be aware that if you start one medication, you may then end up on another medication at some point in the future. So it's probably not just going to be one. You would maybe end up in a cycle of just taking medications ongoing. So these are things most people aren't aware of in a 15-minute doctor visit when we're at that decision point. So I ask people and encourage people to pause first and gather more information, gather more objective data, so you can make an educated, informed decision for your health.
Okay, wow. And so when you approach this, obviously, right, that's what the regular doctor does. They give you these medications, which they always do. And then, like you said, then you need a medication to counterbalance that damage. And then it ends up, and then you probably take high blood pressure medication and metformin and who knows what else. And it becomes like all this. What are you doing differently? And I also want to get into the connection to vision, but let's talk a little bit about what you do differently, because I'm curious how you approach this.
Sure. Well, the first thing you have to do is if you're still actively losing bone, we got to figure that out first. Are you still right now in this moment actively having bone loss? If you are, what's causing it? And how do we address that? That is the first piece, one of the most important pieces, right, that you have to address. So there's at least one test that I'll talk about right now that looks at the activity level of cells that break down bone. This test is called the CTX, the CT low peptide. It's a blood test. And what it looks at is the activity level of cells that are breaking down bone. And if that activity level is elevated and really high, that can be an indicator of active bone loss and an underlying condition that needs to be addressed, or something else that needs to be addressed. So when we see that, then it's a matter of what is contributing to that loss and how do we go about addressing it? Is it hormones? Is it an autoimmune condition? Is it multiple things that are kind of crashing into each other, right? That we have to figure out the root cause issues. The next part of that is then we have to focus on the diet, digestion, absorption piece. Right? You have to be taking in the right nutrients. You can't possibly expect to rebuild something that's not there, right? So you got to take in the right nutrients in the right amounts. That's kind of the first layer. You got to make sure you're actually absorbing those nutrients. That's the second layer. Even if you have overt digestive issues, and I hear this a lot, if you've had long-standing IBS for a long period of time, right, and or some other digestive issues, or you always say I have an upset stomach or belly or something like that, there's a good chance there's something going on with absorption there. But even if you don't have overt digestive issues, you could still have an absorption problem. I mentioned celiac disease earlier. Not everybody with celiac disease has digestive symptoms. So you could still have intestinal damage, but not actually have the symptoms of that. It could show up or be manifesting in some other way. So that's really important to understand. And then the last part of that is, are those nutrients making it to the cell level? And a lot of times, even if somebody is eating healthy, they may be struggling at that top layer of taking in the right nutrients in the right amounts. And it's really hard for the rest of that downstream to line up. And the last part of it really has to be focusing on building strength of body, strength of mind, strength of bone in a way that's going to prevent fracture and injury, not just now, but we got to think about the future too. Because if you want to live to be 100, or beyond, I hear so many people that they've got goals beyond 100. I love that. But we need to support the structure that's going to help get you there too. And that's, you got to reduce your stress. If high levels of stress, and I'm not talking about the physical threat of a lion, right? I'm talking about psychological stress, fear, worry, emotionally charged thoughts, financial conflict, or family conflict, financial challenges, all those things, keeping up with the lives of the Joneses on social media. All those things can drive that stress response. So managing that stress, sleep plays a major role in your bone health. You have to be able to sleep. It's pretty well documented. Poor sleep reduces your bone quality. And then exercise. Exercise is another big one. And we could talk about specifics with exercise here in a minute, but exercise plays a major role in bone health. And there are different types of exercise and things like that we want to do.
So we already touched some of the things that overlap with eyesight, because I mean, you talked about sleep, you talked about stress, and you talked about thoughts, and all that is, I talk about that a lot in vision, because what I do is not so much eye exercises, right? It's really about addressing that level. And you talk about the lion, right? That we do need that stress response. We need that. We need to be, to react properly, appropriately to those things. But we talk about the day-to-day, minute-to-minute stuff, right? The worries, the being awake at night. So those are definitely things that will affect your eyesight. If you don't sleep well, and we have other podcast, episodes on all these topics, but get a little bit more into other things that connect, it doesn't matter if it's nutrients or if there's other things that you connect the bone health to vision, or what you would say, what kind of contributes to bone loss, maybe how is vision related to that?
Sure. And I would even, let's just go with balance, right? Let's start with that one, because out of balance plays a major role obviously, in your bone health, because out of 5 falls that are going to cause a serious injury, so like broken bones and injury, we've got 300,000 people every year, at least in the US, that are having hip fractures. And more than 95% of that those are from falling, right? Balance and falling are very interconnected. And a lot of times there's more to just balance than people think, right? Maintaining your balance is going to play a role in protecting you from falls, but your vision plays a major role in that. So you have to be able to see your surroundings clearly. That's going to keep you from losing your balance. Your vision is going to affect your ability to judge things like the depth of stairs, right? And curbs. As you age, you may be dealing with cataracts or glaucoma, or simply your eyes just taking longer to adjust to those changes in light. All of those things can play a role in your balance. Stronger muscles and stronger bones, those things play a role in your balance. If you've got muscles that are too weak or they're too tight, that can set your balance off. The vestibular system, I'm sure you talk about that, right? The fluid in your inner ear, that plays a role in balance, and it almost acts like a level, right? Telling your body where you are in space. So that's super important. This is a big one, somatosensory system. So I would say even being barefoot is something. A lot of times people wear these really thick padded shoes, and especially, if you're out walking around and you're in public and things like that, that's probably, most people are going to be walking around in some kind of shoes, right? But if you're not, maybe if you're in your home, you've got all these tiny intricate architecture and bones and connective tissue and musculature in your feet, and they're designed to help you grip that ground. And that's going to help you maintain your balance. But if you're always wearing those thick padded shoes every single place you go, you're going to prevent, putting your feet to use in the way that they've been intended to be used. And then you can also do things that like Tai Chi, Qigong, those kinds of movements, and incorporating some of those things can be really helpful. And sleep is a big one again for your balance too. If you're tired, you're sleep deprived, you're probably going to put yourself at a greater risk of falls too. So I would say that would be the biggest connection between vision and your bone health is falls, and preventing those in the future.
You touched on so many great aspects, because anybody that's ever done a yoga class and you stand on one leg and then you close your eyes, you realize do tree pose, and you're pretty good at it, and then you close your eyes. So yes, it's so connected. And I loved all the other points that you touched on with balance, and I love the barefoot talk too, because as you know, I'm a big fan of that. And I switched to barefoot shoes because if we don't feel grounded and connected, we also can't feel really safe. And if we can't feel really safe, we don't feel relaxed, right? Yeah. So I see that with my mom. My mom is in her 80s, and she had several falls during COVID. And it's every time, it's like, it doesn't heal as quickly. And there's more insecurity about walking and being in the space, and maybe not being not having the peripheral vision. You talked about that, how important that is, knowing your proprioception, where your body's in space. So, if your vision is poor, all the things that you talked about, then your balance will be more affected, will be more challenged. Then you get more insecure about less confident, and that causes more strain in the eyes, because now your eyes have to work so much harder in trying to figure out where you are in space. So that's a really, really big one. Are there any nutrients that you think are, important for both eye health and bone health, or do you see any other connections?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say in general, I never especially when I talk about nutrition and nutrients and things like that, I know every single one of us has different preferences and approaches, and maybe have different health conditions also that are going to dictate and determine what we should or shouldn't eat in some situations. So, but in general, I would say there are some foods that I've found that do really well for a lot of people and provide a whole host of nutrients that are going to support not just your bone health, but also your eye health too. So one of my favorite ones is arugula. Arugula, leafy green. Well, I absolutely love it. It's the same cruciferous family of vegetables as broccoli and kale. It's rich in potassium, folate, vitamin C, vitamin K, and this is a big one, bioavailable calcium, right? So about 85 grams or about 3 ounces of arugula and it looks bigger, right? If you're thinking about those plastic clamshells that I hate the plastic that they're in, but that's about the serving size. That'll actually, if you're sauteing that down or something, it'll get to a smaller amount, but that's got about 200 milligrams of bioavailable calcium. The other good thing about arugula is it has high levels of phytonutrients like beta carotene, zeaxanthin, lutein. Those are great for your skin health and your eye health. But this one is really interesting. And this is one of the other reasons I love arugula. And I just found this out recently. So I had already been touting arugula for a couple of years. And then I found this out and I'm like, okay, let's go hard on arugula here. So there was an interesting study found that a bioactive compound in arugula called erosin helped actually turn off osteoclasts. These are the cells that break down bone, which is really, really awesome, right? So there's another reason to use arugula. And arugula is really one of the last bitter foods that most people have in today's modern diets, right? And we need bitter foods because they help stimulate really important digestive juices, one of which is called bile. Bile is produced by the liver. It's stored in the gallbladder. And when you eat food, it helps, break down that food to its smallest form. So really, really helpful. And I love arugula. So if I didn't get that one across, you might want to try to incorporate that and test it.
I love that because I think we should make arugula the new kale because it doesn't have oxalates. And I love arugula. I've been eating it here in Germany a lot as well. So I am totally with you on that arugula thing. And I didn't know some of the things you shared about the powerful stuff it has. So, and like you talked about the diet, right? I think we can probably all agree, unless you had super healthy parents, we all grew up on that crappy diet. I mean, I did, sugar, gluten, dairy, we don't have to talk about meat or no meat, but maybe that's also an interesting discussion. What other foods, but let's talk about the foods that you have found to be harmful for bone health. Is there, because I talk about sugar, I talk about certain things that really destroy your vision, but what about, is there any foods that you're like, other than any foods that we maybe thought are healthy, but that are not healthy for the bones?
Well, there are a few other good ones that I really like that I would say.
Go with that first.
And then we'll go to the ones that can maybe should stay away from. And I love that you touched on oxalates too, because one of the other reasons I love arugula is that it doesn't have high levels of oxalate, right? Oxalates are an anti-nutrient that can bind up those bone healthy minerals like calcium. And if you're somebody who has digestive issues, kidney stones, arthritis, joint pain, if you have those things right now and you're listening to this, you may have a hard time breaking down and degrading oxalate. So swapping and finding low oxalate swaps, that may be a good thing for you. So other high oxalate foods would be beets and dark chocolate and some of those things. Really? Spinach is another really high one.
Chocolate? No.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Dark chocolate, but here's the thing too, is just because something has high levels of oxalate, right, doesn't mean that people have to avoid it all the time, or we have to be, this is what I don't like. I don't like where somebody's afraid of it, right? Mm-hmm. I love people to feel like, hey, you know what? If you're out at a gathering, a family gathering, and everybody's got a good meal and you want to get something that's got a little spinach in it, or you want to get a piece of the dark chocolate, that's okay, right? If it makes you feel good and it reduces your stress and all that, that's just fine. Ongoing, every single day, you probably don't want to have a bunch of high oxalate foods in your diet every single day, right? Probably not a good idea. But other foods that I like, cucumber. I really like cucumber. That's another great one. And the reason I like cucumber is the skin contains silica, which helps mineralize and build and maintain healthy connective tissue. So it helps mineralize bone, which is fantastic. And it's 95% water, which is great for hydration. And it's low sugar, and it's low oxalate, and it's low FODMAP. So all those things are good. And it's pretty easy to incorporate cucumber. Blueberries, I like those. That contains anthocyanins, that's what gives blueberries that beautiful color that they've got. But those are also widely available, right? It's not some rare Amazonian fruit that, is only going to be available to a select few. But then here's another big one, vitamin C rich foods. Vitamin C is key for maintaining a healthy skeleton. The reason for that is that it helps stimulate procollagen, enhance collagen synthesis, and stimulate something called alkaline phosphatase activity, which is a marker for bone building cell formation. And your bones are made up of a collagen protein structure. So we need to stimulate procollagen and enhance collagen synthesis, and vitamin C helps support that. So those are some really great ones. Those are some really great additions to incorporate into your plan. Now, one of the things that you just touched on, which is a food that if you're incorporating this, and you probably heard to get it out, especially if Claudia talks about it, sugar. I'm going to put one more nail in that coffin for you as it relates to bone health. Let me just go for it. Sugar, you need to reduce your sugar intake. It's key for bone health because sugar triggers an inflammatory response. It lowers your vitamin D levels. It depletes bone healthy minerals like calcium, magnesium, chromium, and copper. It inhibits your intestinal absorption of calcium. And you remember how I just talked about how important vitamin C is? Sugar blocks the absorption of vitamin C. So I'm not just talking about that granulated white sugar, right? The tablespoons of white sugar. I'm talking about your breads, your cakes, your cookies, your crackers, your pizzas, your pastas, all that stuff. And what do we do in those situations? Find better alternatives for those things. We don't need to eliminate everything that we feel like we love. Let's just find a better swap, right? And you don't have to do it all at once. Maybe you just do it over time. Make slower swaps over time. So that's sugar is definitely one you don't want to have there. Another thing I would encourage is, we were talking about some great nutrients from berries and different greens and things like that. You really need to be mindful of whether you're eating organic or not. Okay. So there's glyphosate, Roundup in foods that are not organic. There can be higher levels in certain foods. So, and glyphosate obviously is associated with increasing cancer risk, and it's a chelator of minerals. You need those minerals for your bones. So I always encourage people to go to the environmental working group. They've got a list of the clean 15, the dirty dozen. And what that does is it tells you, these are the foods that if you're going to get them and they're not organic, you're probably going to be okay. So if you're listening to this, you're kind of on a budget or something like that, you'll be just fine following those ones on the clean 15. The dirty dozen, like berries, for example. I mentioned blueberries, strawberries, any of those berries. Never eat those if they're not organic. Okay, those have some of the highest levels of chemicals and things like that. You just don't want to be ingesting those. I always encourage people, like, even when they're feeding other people at a party or they're feeding their own kids, would you take chemicals and just spray them into that person's mouth? Probably not. So those are the situations where I'd probably go with the organic foods.
That's a good tip. I actually, here in Germany, I was wondering, because obviously in the EU, there's way strict rules. Monsanto didn't get that far here, so there's definitely less. But still, I don't know if they apply all over the world, because the environmental working group, and I love that. I always buy the Clean 15 conventional, and I love that guidance, because then you can make smart choices. And they do test it every year in the US. So they do retest it every year, which is really great. And you talked about cucumbers. And I remember cucumbers were on the list, at least they were in the past. I don't always follow with the newest list. And if you leave the peel on, which we just learned is really good for your bones, then you definitely want to get those organic. Is there anything else? I mean, diet is always such a, can be such a, because we all have different preferences. And like you said, we all need different things. But is there anything else that you want to point out about diets that maybe certain groups or certain diets have to be careful? Like, I'm vegan, for instance. Is there anything that, you would say to somebody on a pescatarian or on a vegetarian or whatever diet where you might not get some nutrient that you maybe have to supplement, for instance?
Absolutely. So, and I see this a lot, right? I see a lot of situations where people are on plant-based diets and things like that. And we've got people that are on all different kinds of dietary approaches when they come with us, or when they come to us, and when they continue to work with us. A lot of people are on different dietary approaches. So we're figuring out how to best support you within the approach that you're taking. At the same time, I do see a lot of times with plant-based and vegan and things like that, that people will fall short specifically on protein. and amino acids. And you need amino acids. Your bones are 50% protein by volume, and they're made up of this collagen protein matrix structure. That's where the minerals are going to be. That's where the minerals are laid, and they're basically hung. So if you're not getting enough protein, you can't maintain that structure, much less build it, right? And then when you're losing bone also, it's not like you're selectively going in and plucking out the minerals and the calcium. That whole structure, that whole protein structure is torn down. So again, if you want to rebuild bone, you have to get enough amino acids. And a lot of times, even though you can get amino acids in, different meals, and yes, they can form, complete protein, incomplete protein or not, getting those complete proteins as insurance, right, sometimes can be really, really helpful to make sure you're meeting those daily protein needs. So that's just something that an observation I've made, but also a genuine struggle that I see people make, because the minimum protein, and I mean absolute minimum, if somebody weighs 100 pounds, you would absolute minimum 55 grams of protein a day would probably be the absolute minimum. But I would say you need to be getting 30 grams of protein per meal in a day to be able to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, to help you build stronger bones and muscles. That's probably a good target to aim for.
Do you have like an app? Is there something you recommend? Because like for a lot of us, like so many grams of this or that, probably doesn't mean much, unless you say that's a handful of this or that. So is there like an app or something that you recommend? I mean, I know when you work with clients, you probably give them specific plans or you figure out exactly but is there something that you would generally say that people can use to kind of get an idea, how much protein am I getting right now and where can I get more protein, for instance, or fiber, which is something that a lot of people that eat a lot of meat, they don't get the fiber, which you also need, right, to get have the whole system, the gut health in place. Do you recommend, is there anything that you recommend for people to use to get an idea where they're at?
Yeah, I mean, you can use any of those tracking apps that kind of give you an idea of how much protein you're getting, how many macronutrients, how many micronutrients. You can use, there are plenty of those tracking apps out there. We build out specific plans and things like that for people and help guide them specifically with some of those things. But if you're falling short in any of those areas, usually those apps can tell you, and then it's just filling in the gaps in a way that is going to align with your preferences and is actually going to get you the nutrients you need. One of the things you just brought up, which is interesting, is fiber, right? Fiber is, studies have actually found that the microbial fermentation of fiber produces short chain fatty acids, right? These are regulators of these cells in the bone that help regulate bone mass. And there have been studies that have shown that feeding mice with short chain fatty acids and a high fiber diet can markedly increase bone mass, prevent bone loss, and improve osteoporosis. So that's what's really neat, is this protective mechanism of these short chain fatty acids. It's helping reduce the activity of bone breakdown and helping with bone formation. So really, really cool stuff. So fiber is super important also.
I love that you said, because somebody asked on YouTube, fiber. So fiber is only in plant products, like animal products don't have any fiber. So I think a well-balanced diet, depending on your needs, has to include that protein, has to include enough fiber, has to include all these nutrients. And you also talked about food swaps earlier, and that took me a couple of years to figure out. But now, I mean, I go to Costco and they have like tortillas made from chickpeas and almond flour. And it's not like, you have to just eat corn tortillas if you want to eat a gluten-free diet, for instance, or you want to avoid these wheat products. So even the little jicama, Trader Joe's has these little, I think you say jicama, but they have these little, these little round, they shave the fruit in a way. There's so many choices now to make food swaps that are healthy, yummy, and delicious. So you don't have to deprive. My mom is always like, you're depriving yourself. I'm like, no, I'm not. But you have to learn a little bit. You have to kind of be interested in this. So let's kind of wrap this up, because we talked a little bit about exercise, or we touched on exercise a little bit. And what do you consider exercise? Because to me, there's a difference between movement and exercise. It's two, right? So can you talk a little bit more about what you recommend specifically for bone health, or what kind of exercise you're talking? Cardio, strength training, both, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, so exercise super important for your bone health, and really for your bones, you need two different types of exercise and stimuli, right? You need muscle pulling on bone, and you need impact. Muscle pulling on bone is where you've got a mechanical signal sending a chemical signal for those bones to become stronger. So that's super important. And then impact is also important too. And when we talk about impact, especially if you're listening, you've got kids and grandkids of your own. Like me, for me, I've got young kids. They're playing sports, right? They're playing soccer. They're doing gymnastics. I want them to start with that good foundation when they're putting on 90% of their bone mass in those first 18 years, right? I want them to get a good microarchitectural structure in their bones. So gymnasts have good bone density, soccer players with multi-directional impacts and movements, really quick, short bursts, they've got stronger bone density in their legs. But a lot of times what people recommended is, hey, go for a walk, right? Walking is going to be enough. Just go for a walk. And I'm going to tell you, it's not enough, right? Walking is great for your health, and it's great to incorporate in your plan. But if you're talking about building bone strength, just doing walking is not going to be enough. So you've got to incorporate the weight bearing exercise. And weight bearing, for those people that don't understand, weight bearing is where your muscles and your bones have to work against gravity to keep you upright. They're things that you're doing on your feet, and doing them on your feet is going to place a good stress on your bones. And that's what you need, that stress. So this would be you're running, you're jogging, you're hiking, you're dancing, you're gardening, playing tennis, jumping rope, all those kinds of things are going to fall into that weight bearing exercise. This could also be, though, it could be Pilates or yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong. Those kinds of things could also be weight bearing. Now, what's not weight bearing is not going to be supportive for your bones. So this would be things like, this is where you don't have that stress on your bones. So you're cycling, you're swimming, that's a big one, paddling. We also can't count those things as the only form of exercise, because your body's not bearing its own weight and you don't have that good stress. So it's not to say that you have to avoid like cycling and that you have to avoid swimming. Especially if it reduces your stress and it makes you happy, that's an important part of your life too. But you got to incorporate other things. So what's the other thing you have to incorporate? Muscle strengthening and resistance training exercise. So this would be like with resistance bands. And you can probably hear my dogs barking in the background. They're going crazy right now. But in terms of muscle strengthening and resistance exercise, you've got resistance bands, you've got barbells, you've got dumbbells, all those kinds of things that you can be incorporating. And, I don't ever encourage people to don't just go on YouTube, see the first exercise you do and start throwing weights around. That's probably not going to be good, because especially if you don't have a background in lifting and resistance training, the last thing I want is for you to have an injury trying to lift a heavy weight at an intensity that's going to support your bones. So I would encourage you to, you're going to want to do some of the movements that are, squats, deadlifts. If you haven't had fractures, like especially spinal fractures, overhead presses can be helpful. Some of these movements can be really helpful in your plan, but again, you need to know where you're at. You need to understand your own body mechanics. We don't want to have an injury or something like that, especially if you're not familiar with those exercises.
So somebody is asking on YouTube, is body weight not enough, like Qigong yoga? Like, you do push-ups, or I have TRX bands. I used to take TRX before COVID, and, we do a lot of pulling on the bands and you use your body weight. So are you saying we need additional resistance with the resistance band or the weights, or right? That's what you're saying. So both is important, but we need both, right?
Yeah. So it has to be at an intensity, and this is scary for people. And when we say intensity, right, we get scared when we say the word intensity, but that just means that it's providing enough stimulus for your muscles and your bones. That's really what I'm getting at there is, and what's most effective, and it's shown to be most effective, is the 5 to 10 repetition range. So the weight or whatever you're using should be able to have you at that intensity where, in between that 5 to 10 rep range, you may be having some challenges, right? It's not easy. So if you're right now doing body weight exercises and you're able to do 100 of something or 50 of something, is the intensity going to be where it needs to be to help you build the muscle and the bone strength, right? So we just got to think about that when we're actually building this plan. And then some of the movements I talked about, the squats, the deadlifts, the overhead presses, they're not just working one single isolated muscle group also. So really important to keep some of those things in mind.
So I just have a question. So when it comes to, we often think more about falls and the bones and the legs and the hips, but is it as important? Obviously, right? You can break your arm, but obviously, right? So it's really important to strengthen everything. So you don't just work out the legs or do the squats or whatever. And with jogging, a lot of times there's a lot of these things have a very, like even yoga, you might do a million chaturangas, but there's a lot of the repetition with a lot of these things. So I gather a multitude of different practices that you go through a lot of different ranges of motions and a lot of different way to stress. What do you think about HIIT exercises or HIIT workouts for bone health?
Yeah. And I mean that if you're doing workouts like that 2 or 3 times a week, but again, you need to be incorporating the movements that are actually going to help you, stimulate bone and build bone strength. So when I was talking about the specific exercise I was talking about, that was research done with Dr. Belinda Beck. She ran something called a Lift More trial. And that's where it showed, doing overhead press and deadlift and squat and chin-ups and drop landings and those kinds of things were safe and effective for the people that they used them in. So using some of those studies and that research as a foundation for building out your plan, that's going to be really, really helpful too.
So 2 more questions before we have to come to a close, because we went longer than I planned, but this is such an interesting topic. So first of all, I do want to know what your plan, like what does a bone plan really mean, and how often do you recheck your bone with a DEXA scan so that you know that you're actually doing something useful? And then maybe you answer that first, but the other one would be, so does it mean when you have osteoporosis or you have low bone density, does it mean you're going to break a bone sooner or later? Maybe that's probably a quicker one to answer before we come to the plan.
Yeah, just because you have low bone density, right, does not mean that your fate has to be a fracture. Yes, if you have low bone density, is your chance of fracture, is the likelihood of that happening increased? Yes, of course. But I always encourage people, if you do something about it. Be on the side of prevention, not reaction. That's always best to be in those situations. I work with people that have anywhere from no fractures to 5 to 10 or more fractures. And I can tell you the group that has 5 to 10 or more fractures is always talking about, I wish I would have done something sooner. So the sooner we get that objective information, the sooner we get a bone density scan, or if you've already got a scan and you know where you're at and you've just kind of been putting it off like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually. I would get to it, right? Make it a priority because this is important, right? Your skeleton is what holds you up. That's what's going to carry you into an active future. And you have to be able to be active. So that's really important. And then in terms of checking those things, get your bone density scan now if you haven't had one. If you've already got one, usually it's going to be a year and a half, 2 years before somebody gets another bone density scan. So what we look at and what we encourage people to focus on the leading indicators. Now, what are the leading? A DEXA scan is a lagging indicator of success. So you don't want to wait a year and a half, 2 years of guessing to wonder if you're doing the right things, right, to support your bones. You want to objectively figure things out up front, focus on all the things that give you the best shot of improvement. And that way, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years down the line, when you do go get your next bone density scan, you're not surprised. If you've lost more bone, you're confident that, hey, I'm doing it.
You would test in the meantime, the leading to tell you, are those the blood tests that you talked about in the beginning?
Yeah, so one of them. So some of the leading indicators are, number one, are you still actively losing bone, right? And that can be figured out, or partially at least, by serum CTX, CT low peptide blood test. telling you the activity level of cells in your bone. And if that comes back and it's elevated, and there's a root cause issue that needs to be addressed, that's the next piece. You got to address the root cause issues. And then you got to have those conversations with your doctor. You need to understand your lab results when they come back, because a lot of times those lab results, when they come back, they're in a really wide range. And if you're within that range, I just saw shrinking. Is it a sign of losing bone density? Yeah. If you're losing height, that's not necessarily a good sign of your bone health improving, right? There's probably something that needs to be addressed there also. But in terms of the other leading indicators, we would have nutrition, right? Diet, nutrition, absorption, digestion, all of those things, that plays a major role in your bone health. So you got to address all those things and seeing improvements there. And then reducing your stress, improving your sleep, and getting that right exercise plan in place. Those are leading indicators. And then you can have subjective and objective improvements in those things.
Sounds great. And I put all your links underneath, but what the best way is probably to go to your website, bonecoach.com. And I also put a link in for, I think it's a little form that you can fill out to, can you talk a little bit more about that before we come to that?
This is what I want to do for your audience is let's give them access to my free Stronger Bones Masterclass. And this is the best starting point for anybody, right? You can always find me at bonecoach.com, and you can always find me on all the social channels and all that stuff, YouTube and Facebook and all that. But I would encourage you to start with, Claudia, I hope we can maybe put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm looking at the link right now. I have a link that I can put in the YouTube chat, and I to put in the Zoom chat here.
Sure. And this is the free Stronger Bones Masterclass, and it walks through that 3-step process that I was just talking about, but it goes a little bit more in depth, right? And that's what you need to go for and check that out. And let me see. Yeah. Okay. So, yep. And that's going to help you start getting the right plan in place to improve your health and your bones. So, Stronger Bones Masterclass, and then bonecoach.com. You can always find me there.
Yeah, I put a little bit.ly link that whatever the HTTP is missing, but you can make it work. And yeah, people said that was great. Thank you so much. And we have a little extra discussion with my Clear Vision Club peeps here at the end, and I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much. I learned a whole lot, and the connection to vision is there. And I think we often separate all these items, but in the end, it all plays together. And what we do, the stress, the sleep, the mindfulness, the thoughts, the food that we eat, the exercise that we do, because even for eyes, it's not necessarily eye exercise, but that walking, that movement is so important for our eye health as well. So thank you so much, Kevin. Any last words you want to say before we come to an end?
No, I would just say, I mean, if you know you need help, right? You know you need help getting a plan in place. We have programs. We've helped a lot of people in over 1,500 cities around the world. We've got a highly credentialed team. Our program's featured in Forbes. So a lot of good stuff there. So you don't have to try to do all this stuff alone. There is help, and we can help you figure that stuff out.
Thank you so much. And somebody was asking about the blood test names, but I think you probably covered that in the masterclass.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I figured. Okay, well, thank you so much, YouTube. Thank you, Kevin. And we're going to be back here next week with another Kevin, who is a vision educator. And so thank you so much. I found this incredibly helpful. So thank you, Kevin. And YouTube, goodbye, YouTube. And we will